Hello and welcome to China Tonight. I'm Stan Grant. On the program, Made in China, the new push to boost local manufacturing. Hollywood versus homegrown movies. And we talk to the star of China's global TV network. This week, the Chinese Communist Party will mark its 100th anniversary, from its early days in Shanghai to the overthrow of the nationalists in 1949, beginning the long reign of Mao Zedong, at once ending the century of humiliation, but also the architect of the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution, which cost the lives of millions. Deng Xiaoping brought modern China, and now Xi Jinping is president for life. The CCP story has been of epic proportions. With more than 90 million members and its influence extending to all facets of Chinese life, the party's birthday is a big deal in China. Ceremonial performance has been a key feature of Chinese anniversaries, sending a message to the world as much as people at home.
No force can stop the Chinese people and the Chinese nation forging ahead.
Joining me now from Melbourne is Yvonne. And Yvonne, unlike previous anniversaries of this type, this time the event is more COVID-scaled.
Hi Stan, yes, while President Xi Jinping has promised grand celebrations, the defence chiefs say there will be no military parade, unlike the footage we just saw there. Instead, Xi will deliver a speech and award July 1 medals to members of the ruling party. We're also expecting firework displays as well as film festivals and theatre across the country promoting Chinese stories, 100 wedding ceremonies, that's part of the push for a higher birth rate, and this special compilation, Stan, a 15-minute montage of rap performers. Now, overnight, 20,000 people, including the president, watched a performance titled The Great Journey at the National Stadium. But take a look at this, courtesy of the BBC's correspondent in Beijing, the massive traffic jam created to make way for the party officials attending the event.
What is it like to be the face and voice of China to the world? Well, Liu Xin is the star anchor for the English language news channel CGTN, China Global Television Network. With a potential audience of millions of people around the world, it is a powerful platform of influence, telling a compelling story from China's perspective. But is it news or propaganda? This week, Liu Xin will lead coverage of the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party at a time of rising tension with the West. And she joins me now from Beijing. Liu Xin, it's a real pleasure to have you on the program. It's a great opportunity to have just this type of dialogue that is absolutely necessary. And in that spirit, can I ask you this? You are there to present news from a Chinese perspective, but is it the reality that it is news from a Chinese Communist Party perspective?
It's a great pleasure, Stan, and I'm humbled to be one of the voices or faces representing China. There are many other people who represent truly the spirit of China and the Chinese people. And so to answer your question, I think there is a very important distinction that has to be made, which is the relationship between the Communist Party of China and the Chinese people. In foreign countries, often people pitch these two against each other. They're separated, whereas in China, you have to understand that the Communist Party is really a part of the people. It represents the people. So what CGTN does, instead of being on the opposite side against the government or against the people, we actually connect these two.
When it comes to that, you are a state broadcaster. what you say is ultimately vetted, is it not, by the Chinese Communist Party? And there are Chinese Communist Party members at CGTN to ensure that that party line is delivered. In that case, then, could it not be anything but propaganda? It is not a critical voice of the party.
Let me show you how I do my program. You know, the show is live. There's nobody to put a gunpoint at someone and say, you have to say this or you have to say that, or otherwise, if I don't tell a certain line, I'm going to lose my job. No, it comes from here. And it comes from here. What I believe, what I see, what I think, what I know as facts, that's what I do.
But Liu Xin,
it's simple.
Would you be able to use the language of genocide, which has been used by the United States, other countries, human rights organisations, about the treatment of people in Xinjiang? Would you be able to speak critically and openly about the democracy protests in Hong Kong and locking up people in Hong Kong for democracy protests? Would you be able, just one more example, sorry, and then I'd like to hear from you, but would you be able to critically look at the Tiananmen massacre, for instance, and talk about what really occurred on that day?
Well, there are sensitivities in every country, and we have to respect the fact that there are topics that are considered taboo, that are considered sensitive. But it's a very tiny, list, I would say. Most of the time we discuss, for instance, the so-called genocide that you use. We discussed multiple times the protest in Hong Kong. Of course, there are people who come in and say, you know, the protesters have their grievances, which could be legitimate as well. And we're not saying they're always violent. Some of them are peaceful. And you have to look at what's on their mind, what really drives them to go out and protest and even resort to violence, so on and so forth. We discuss these topics. But from a factual perspective, accusation is accusation. Truth is truth. Reality is reality.
Here is also a fact. Organisations like Apple Daily in Hong Kong have now been closed, and the owner is now on charges and facing goodness knows how long in jail. Journalists are locked up in China. We know that to be a fact, and foreign journalists have had to leave the country. How does that sit with you as a journalist and sit with the idea of press freedom?
It is a very difficult time for journalism to truly shine. Journalists are caught in the crossfire of political conflicts. While you are talking about what has happened, or what you believe has happened in these parts of China, let's not forget Chinese journalists have also been made very difficult to work in other parts of the world, right? We were labeled as some kind of a foreign agent, for instance, in the United States. So these actions some of the actions are reciprocal. I'm not saying all of the actions are. And when you talk about some news organizations being closed, such as in the case of Hong Kong, we have to understand journalists or the press do not operate in China, as in Australia, as in any part of the world. They do not operate above the law.
What happens when that law means that journalists are jailed? And I want to ask you about something that obviously is very sensitive, and very sensitive for you at CGTN, and obviously has been a big concern here in Australia with the Australian journalist who is a colleague of yours, Chung Lei, who is now behind bars and awaiting a very uncertain and very concerning fate.
Of course, I'm aware of the situation. Actually, I have known Chen Lei for years because she has been working with CGTN and its predecessor for years. I'm not very close to her. We normally, have a working relationship. But on the other hand, what she does or what has happened in her private life or in her time outside of the office, I am not aware, and I'm not in the position to comment on an ongoing legal case. I do want to say that I hope her children are taken good care of. It's a difficult period of time, and I hope and I trust that she will get a fair trial and treatment according to all the relevant laws and norms. That's all I can tell you at this moment.
What was the reaction inside CGTN to her arrest, and does that then impact on the way that you do your job?
We deal with sensitive issues sometimes, and we deal with information that can be that can be seen as related to national security. And I think that's the situation with journalists everywhere. So there is this layer of national security risk. I cannot deny that. I don't think it is a campaign aimed at any particular group of people. It is, I believe, it is an individual case. If someone breaks the law, it has, there will be consequences. I believe, I hope, and I trust that she will get a fair trial. That's all I can tell.
With the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, with this environment that some have described, and you've alluded to this, as potentially a new Cold War, where is this heading from a Chinese perspective? What is the end game here, if you like?
At the end of the day, the end game, if I can look into the future, I hope, there will be peaceful coexistence of all countries in the world, despite their political differences, despite their ideologies, despite their strengths or whatever. Every country will be able to exist in peace and prosper. There shouldn't be this idea that because you are different or you do things differently from us, you have to change to become like us. I don't think that is the right way to go. If Western countries or advanced economies give that pressure and have that vision for China, they're going to be very, very disappointed. The 100-year celebration of the CPC, I think the biggest message is the Chinese system worked under the leadership of the CPC. The Chinese people are happy and proud that their lives have changed fundamentally, and they're not going to give it up for anybody else to please anybody else, to be accepted into any club. No, we will continue to independently pursue our path, and please don't say, you are not like us, you are not good enough, why don't you do things our way? It's not going to work. We will find our way.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you. It's a great opportunity to have just this type of conversation, and I really appreciate you giving us your time, Liu Xin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stan.
Weibo and WeChat users are increasingly questioning whether the revived focus on the origins of COVID might be more about politics than science. In simple terms, the virus either has a natural origin or resulted from a lab leak. In the early months of the pandemic, the latter got caught in conspiracy theories about bioweapons, although that was dismissed by many as tin hat nonsense, Stan.
And Yvonne, a World Health Organization report as well talked down the lab leak idea?
That's right. While the WHO doesn't rule it out, it found a laboratory origin of the pandemic was considered to be extremely unlikely, but its probe was criticised for China's involvement, and with no clear origin found, attention is once again on whether the accidental leak theory has substance. The G7 nations have called for a full investigation. American President Joe Biden has asked intelligence agencies to dig a little deeper for a cause, and according to the What's on Weibo site, that's been drawing a lot of attention in China.
So what about the Chinese government itself? Has it had much to say about this?
Well, Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian says the US is only interested in blame shifting and should look at its own behaviours instead of attempting to scapegoat China. China's secrecy hasn't helped its cause. The focus on the Wuhan Institute of Virology continues, despite the insistence of its director, Xi Jinping, that her lab was not the source.
And I note as well, Yvonne, that claim was backed today by the only foreign researcher at the Wuhan lab at the time.
Australian scientist Daniel Anderson, who told Nine newspapers, well, you shouldn't write off the leak theory. She still believes it most likely came from a natural source. One of the key challenges facing China is the constant criticism from around the world of China's alleged human rights breaches, in particular in Xinjiang. But the Chinese government is trying to turn the tables on that. Beijing made a point this week of highlighting the human rights failures of countries speaking up about Xinjiang. China's mission to the UN called for an independent investigation into the discovery of the remains of more than 200 Indigenous children at a Canadian boarding school.
Historically, Canada robbed the Indigenous people of their land, killed them, and eradicated their culture.
Well, that call came just a day after Canada's ambassador to the UN led a group of 40 countries in calling for immediate access to Xinjiang to investigate alleged human rights abuses there. And after the US this week moved to halt commerce reportedly tied to forced labour in the region, China's foreign ministry had this to say.
我们也提醒美方，真正搞种族灭绝和强迫劳动的，正是美国自己。美国政客还是多反省美国对印第安土著居民、塔尔萨非洲裔种族灭绝的历史。
China again making it clear it does not want to be lectured on human rights by Western nations. And as part of the CCP's 100-year celebrations, the government's spruiking its own successes on this front, with the State Council Information Office issuing a white paper assuring citizens the party is the fundamental guarantee for human rights in China.
And some major technological achievements for China this week as well.
Indeed, the switch of the giant Baihetan hydropower plant was flicked on for the first time. It's taken just 4 years to build the station, with 16 hydroelectric generating units installed.
按照我们的计算，转人每转一圈可发电约150度，相当于一个普通家庭1个月的用电量。
It'll be a major source of power for high energy consuming regions in the east and is set to help China reach its climate change goals, including achieving carbon neutrality by 2060. President Xi has sent his congratulations to the team behind the project, as he did earlier in the week when he spoke to 3 taikonauts on the Tianhe space module.
海胜同志、伯明同志、洪波同志，你们辛苦了。
Now, they're testing out technologies as China strives to finish building its first space station.
这是人类首次获取。
Also this week, new footage captured by the Zhurong probe was released. The only other country to land and operate a spacecraft on Mars is the United States. So a big week for China, Stan.
Always is, Yvonne. Thank you for that. One of the great lessons of America's rise to superpower status was the impact of its culture. Hollywood films, in particular, have exported America's values, beliefs, and myths to the world. But it's also a big business, and for years, Hollywood has been trying to break into the lucrative Chinese market, leading to all manner of hoop jumping, careful casting choices, and censorship. China is now making its own movies on a grand scale, which are more often than not outranking Hollywood at the box office. Film and TV critic Wenlei Ma reports.
When the long-delayed sequel to Tom Cruise's Top Gun is released later this year, fans might notice something different about Maverick's iconic jacket. Instead of the Taiwanese and Japanese flags on its back, they've been replaced with similar symbols. Why? Because Hollywood doesn't want to upset China and its 1.4 billion consumers.
The Chinese government understands the value of cultural soft power, and Hollywood understands the value of the Chinese box office.
In 2010, the Chinese box office was worth almost $1.5 billion, and before the pandemic hit, it reached a high of $9.2 billion. It is now the biggest movie box office in the world.
With only 34 foreign films allowed into the country each year, to snag a spot, Hollywood is choosing to self-censor certain topics.
You think you know how the world works?
We know in the case of Doctor Strange, one of the screenwriters spoke out about how they changed the character of the Ancient One from being Tibetan to Celtic.
Conveniently avoiding any reference to China's disputed sovereignty claim over Tibet. The 2012 Red Dawn remake turned the Chinese villains into North Koreans during post-production, while the Freddie Mercury biopic Bohemian Rhapsody edited out 3 minutes of gay scenes to get it past the censors. Even actors are being blacklisted, like Richard Gere, who is well known for his activism for Tibetan independence.
Very talented Chinese directors that one was in tears with me, having to call me up and say that he couldn't work with me, that his career would be over and his family could not travel.
Challenged by streaming services, US movie studios have increasingly looked outside of North America for box office revenue. But inside China, the local film industry is maturing and churning out its own movie franchises. Like Detective Chinatown 3, which debuted to $424 million at a time when many of the world's cinemas remained closed. When Hollywood attempts to make a film for Chinese audiences, it falls flat. Crazy Rich Asians, The Farewell, and Mulan have performed abysmally in China.
And I think what we see with films like The Farewell bombing in China is that there are very different cultural experiences, and that's reflected in the fact that they didn't resonate with mainland Chinese audiences. And I think that we can see that this is an important lesson for Hollywood studios to learn, to not conflate these identities. And not just Hollywood studios. So a lot of people should be learning that lesson.
Marvel has a big blockbuster coming out soon, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. How do you think this is going to play out for that?
If there is anything that's going to be able to cross this divide, this really has the potential to do so.
Does it matter that Hollywood is self-censoring its own movies? Does it not undermine its own credibility as these, honest storytellers or champions of creative freedom?
As someone who used to live in LA, I will say that I don't think Hollywood has ever put itself up as a model of honesty. So I think I can, however, the creative freedom issue, I think, is a really serious one. And I think that there is a really significant tension in the spoken commitment to creativity and what we're seeing on an economic level.
It may not seem like changing Tom Cruise's jacket in Top Gun is a big deal, but it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
Ed Winley joins me now. One of the Hollywood franchises released in China, Fast and Furious, we're on to what, 9?
Number 9.
How has that performed?
Fast and Furious is really popular in China. So the previous movies have made like $400 million each in China. This one has done about half of that. So there's a couple of theories around why it's underperformed after 5 weeks. One of them is that the reviews are kind of middling. But the other one
Maybe there's been too many of them.
Maybe there's been too many of them. But, they have this huge appetite for these giant American blockbusters. But one of the things that have happened is that one of the actors, John Cena, said in a promotional video, I'm really excited for Taiwan to be the first country in the world to see this, and that got so many people's hackles up.
No, there was an apology as well,
there
right?
There was a grovelling apology.
Here is some of Cena's apology.
必须说，现在就是很重要，我爱更尊重中国，更中国人，我很抱歉对我的错误。
Why China? I love China, as if you didn't know. What does that say, though, that apology about Hollywood's approach to China?
I think it just means that Hollywood is still super sensitive about how these sort of things play out in China. John Cena is not George Clooney or Angelina Jolie. He's a comedic actor. He doesn't give speeches to the UN. No one is looking to him for geopolitical commentary. So when something like what John Cena says in a promotional video in a pretty harmless context comes out and they have to overreact, they have to, apologize so profusely, and then the box office doesn't really pick back up, it just says to Hollywood that, they have to tread so carefully. So John Cena didn't set out to be political when he said Taiwan is a country, but what the fallout shows is that Hollywood, Universal Studios, the Fast and Furious franchise, and now John Cena says that Taiwan is not a sovereign nation. Yeah,
play by different rules. You want to put the film out there and make the money. That's the price. Winley, terrific to talk to you. Thank you again. Great story.
Thank you.
When you hear made in China, what do you think? Well, for many of us, it's cheap rip-offs or faulty products, but there's a much more complex story. A new push within China to reinvigorate the manufacturing industry is seeing higher quality goods take priority. Annie Louie has more.
When I was growing up, my parents used to embarrass the heck out of me by going to stores and asking all the employees, where was this made? Was it made in China?
Yeah.
What about this? What about this? What about this?
Yeah.
They weren't asking because they thought the products were inferior. Quite the opposite. They were extremely proud of their Chinese heritage and working class roots. In fact, my mum made this jumper when she was 19, working her first job at a factory in Guangzhou.
Economic reforms in the late 1970s opened China up to the world. The chairman then, Deng Xiaoping, declared the 4 modernisations: reform to agriculture, industry, defence and science and technology. And soon, manufacturing took its place as the backbone of China's economy.
I would say late 1990s, especially after the new millennium, the rise of consumerism really taking hold, so people are encouraged to spend very crucially by the state government.
Thanks to low labour and material costs, China has been able to make big name brands for a fraction of the price, and developed countries like Australia lapped it up. On the flip side, China has been mocked for pumping out bad knockoffs, like the Landwind SUV and Sunbucks coffee, plus plenty of other cheap and cheerful goods we probably don't need, like umbrella hats, butt pads, and fish slippers. I wonder if they sing when you walk.
Hello. Jokes aside, China is now fighting hard to be taken seriously when it comes to consumer products, not just by the rest of the world, but by its own citizens too.
Olympic game is a little bit of kind of change China's image kind of globally slightly. People think, okay, this is the country can do something, rather than just making stuff for cheap.
And with it came a new wave of pride that Chinese people have had for locally made products.
Citizens started buying Huawei over iPhone en masse, and they're trading in their Volkswagens for Chinese-made BYGs with confidence. It's not just luxury goods. Chinese consumers are embracing locally made, everyday products too, like clothing, home appliances and food. Some Western clothing brands recently boycotted cotton from the Xinjiang province due to consistent allegations of forced labour. But Chinese consumers hit back by buying even more from domestic brands over the Western ones.
There's certain elements of patriotism or pride, of course, when a country become, transformed itself in a short space of time. But the more important is because the products are getting better.
To maintain their competitive edge, the CCP has rolled out their Made in China 2025 plan to improve in 10 different areas, ranging from robotics to medicine and agriculture equipment. As China shakes off its cheap reputation, workers have started demanding better than cheap wages.
There have been more and more strikes, and also workers' awareness have risen to the point of demanding collective bargaining. But since Xi Jinping came to power, it has been a much more suppressive labor regime.
I've seen a lot of companies say that they manufacture ethically now. Would you say that it's difficult to verify?
It is actually very difficult. It's not just Australian companies. A lot of them rely on suppliers. So it is extremely difficult to monitor. It's contractors and subcontractors and subcontractors. It is very difficult.
In recent years, there's a lot of talks about, whether China is a little bit too consumeristic now. There's a lot of debate in social media, also within, the nation's kind of collective conscience. You spend so much money on buying things you don't really need. Do they have to invent so many festivals and to promote all these shopping habits? So I think it's something to watch out for the future.
But do shoppers in China and around the world really care when it comes down to their own pockets?
Like, I just really need these. And if I buy before midnight, I'll get free shipping. And I've got a discount code. Yep, I'll get it.
And that's our show for the night. I'm Stan Grant. Enjoy the rest of your evening.